Hi everyone, this is Bill from turboDial. In this video we're going to go into the details on how to create SIP credentials and use those with voice over IP SIP devices. So what are the benefits of having a SIP device? SIP devices include some hard phones that can sit on your desk or on a wall, physical device that is always on. And so that can be a useful way of making and receive phone calls. You don't need to be logged into a computer, for example. You may also find value in using some of the soft phone clients that are available for mobile devices and PCs. SIP devices can also give you expanded user access to turboDial, since anyone in your company could use a physical device or a soft phone client to make and receive phone calls using turboDial, even if they aren't logged in or don't even have a login for Infusionsoft and are not authorized as a user of turboDial. So this video will go through these topics. First of all, we'll go through the setup procedures, how to create, modify, or delete a SIP credential, how to register a voice over IP SIP device using that credential so that you can make and receive phone calls from it, and how to forward an inbound number in your turboDial account to ring at a device that's registered using one of these credentials. We'll go through making outbound calls and the note records that turboDial creates for those calls, likewise inbound calls and those note records. We'll go through how to create some reports about those calls for your Infusionsoft dashboard. We'll give some examples of some SIP devices that you might want to use. We'll show you how to achieve simultaneous ringing for voice over IP number destinations, and that's kind of a special topic that does relate to SIP devices. We'll show you how to access the advanced call handling features when you're using a SIP device, and there will be a couple of additional notes at the end. Okay, let's talk about how to create and modify a SIP credential. For this purpose, we're going to bring up a turboDial panel right next to us so you can see that. It is logged into turboDial, and it's logged in as an admin user. And you can tell that because you can see that the Global Options button and the Advanced Features button is available up here. And so that means this is an admin account. I'm going to open the Advanced Feature configuration by clicking on that button, and then choose to modify SIP credentials. Now you can see there's several options here. The first one is that we can add a new or modify an existing credential. I'm going to click the plus button to add a new credential. It asks us to give it a name. I'm going to call it the video demo credential. It's already pre-assigned a password as a default, and we could leave that if we want, or we can change that password to whatever we would like. If you click that little eyeball, you'll see what the password is, and if you click it again, it's no longer visible. We want to choose an assigned user. This will be the user in your team who will be assigned ownership of the note records associated with calls that you make outbound with this SIP credential. It has no effect on inbound calls. Ownership of inbound calls is set up when you create and configure an inbound number. Next, we're going to choose whether we want a screen pop to be displayed for an outbound call to this user that we've just assigned. And we'll talk about the value of that screen pop later. I'm going to go ahead and indicate yes, we want that. But in many cases, you will not want that. We need to set what the caller ID we are going to use when we make a call. So I'm going to just choose one of my caller IDs there and designate that as the caller ID. So any outbound call made from a device that's registered with this video demo credential will use the caller ID that I've designated there. If I want to have all of my outbound calls recorded, I could check this box. In this case, I think I'll leave it unchecked. And now I can update and save those credentials. Now, once that update is done, I want to go back to that one I just created. And I want to make note of these values for SIP device registration. I will be needing those later. And if I click the eyeball next to the password, it does display it down here also. We'll be coming back to this because these values will be used when I set up the configuration for a SIP device. Okay, let's just talk about how to delete a credential that we no longer need. It's quite easy to do. We're just going to simply select the credential from our list of credentials here. And in this case, I'm going to delete this one, test me 1. And we click the trash can button. I'll confirm that that's what I want to do. And now when I click the update, that credential will be removed from the account. And you can see it's no longer here in the list. Note that deleted credentials will immediately disable any devices that you've registered to use them, and that will mean inbound and outbound calls to those devices will fail. So you will want to reconfigure your devices before you delete the credential. Okay, let's talk about how to register a voice over IP SIP device using a credential. First thing we need to do is find the account configuration screen for our device. I'm going to come over here and I've got a Grandstream desk phone sitting next to me here. I'm going to go ahead and log into the configuration screen for it. And you can see that I've got an account 1 and account 2. This phone allows me to set up 2 different credentials that it can support. I've got account 1 already set up. Account 2 is not set up, so I'm going to set up account 2, going to the general settings. Now I will use the settings that I received when I created that credential before. We continue using that video demo credential that we created earlier. Now I've got a value called the domain. In turboDial it's called the domain. In the Grandstream configuration it's called the SIP server. I'm going to paste that there. I've got a username called video demo. Got a couple places where I need to put that. I'm going to put it there under the account name. I'm going to put it there as the user ID and as the authenticate ID. I'm also going to use it here. And then the last thing I have is this password. Over here this is called the authenticate password, and I'm going to paste it right there. Now as another step, notice I've got some instructions here to enable keep alive settings and timers to ensure that the firewall ports on my local network remain open for this device. On a Grandstream, I can find that under network settings. There's something called NAT traversal. I'm going to set that to be keep alive. So this phone will now send periodic packets out to the SIP server in Twilio in order to keep the firewall ports open. That will allow this phone to be reached for inbound calls. If I don't do the keep alive, this phone will become unreachable behind the firewall and inbound calls won't work. Okay, back here on my general settings, these other items do not need to be filled in. Voicemail access is not available with SIP credentials in turboDial, so I can leave that blank. And now I can do a save and apply. I just heard the phone next to me give a little beep. And now if I look at status, oops, it's not yet enabled. So let's go back to account 2, general settings. Account active, I can click yes, save and apply. All right, account 2 is voice demo is now shown as active. Notice that up to 10 separate devices can register using the same credential. So if I had 10 phones sitting next to me, I could register each one of them using that video demo credential, but the limit is 10. Then if an inbound call comes into that credential, all of the devices registered to it will ring simultaneously. Most voice over IP SIP devices allow you to register 2 or more SIP credentials. This Grandstream phone I just demonstrated allows 2. Now we're going to forward an inbound number to a credential. Now, when forwarding an inbound number to a SIP credential, only one forwarding destination is allowed. And we'll talk a little bit later in the presentation about what to do about that if you need to have simultaneous ringing inbound for multiple destinations, where some of them are SIP destinations. But for now, recognize that only one forwarding destination is allowed if the forwarding destination is a SIP destination. So let's bring our turboDial screen back. I'm going to choose the number in our inbound and SMS area. We're going to choose the number that we want to configure for this SIP credential. Let's choose this one here. Click the Modify button. Now here it shows the labels and the ownership, the users that's been assigned to this number and such. It also shows what users will be alerted when an inbound call comes into this number. And in this case, it's set to alert with a screen pop all of the users who are currently logged in. There's no call recordings for this number. It's turned off. Now let's go to the next screen. Currently this number is set to ring simultaneously to 2 different phone numbers and to a soft phone. To the left of each of these fields is something called the Quick Field Selector. Now if I look at these are all the options I can use to easily fill in a value for the field next to it. The first field is special in that it's got the SIP credentials. The other ones did not have that. I'm going to choose that SIP credential we just created, video demo. And notice when I chose that, all the other fields became disabled, and they are no longer set to forward to a destination. That's just to reiterate what I said before. Only one forwarding destination is allowed. I'm going to update and next. Now I'm going to choose the none option here for next actions. We don't want to put voicemail or auto attendant, etc. on this number. You may if you need to. If you don't require one of these features, then I recommend you do not set one, and I'll explain later the value of not setting it. Click Update. I have now configured that phone number to use the SIP credential that we created earlier. Now that inbound number, as I mentioned, can only forward to one SIP credential. However, a voice over IP SIP device can register to multiple credentials, and so here's an example picture of what you might see. Here are two phone numbers. Each of them are configured to forward to a single SIP credential, and only one is allowed. But each of those SIP credentials have been used to register by 3 different devices, and each of those devices has registered to both of them. So that means that an inbound call to this 1234 number will ring all 3 of these devices. And likewise, an inbound call to this 4321 number will also ring all 3 of those devices. Now let's talk about outbound calls made with a SIP device that you've registered to a credential. When you start that call, the call will be recorded, but only if it was indicated to be recorded on the credential option. Let's open up those options again and look at that. Let's choose Video Demo. And notice we said it's not going to be recorded. But as that call proceeds, the number you are calling from that device, will be used by turboDial to look up in Infusionsoft to find if there is a contact in your Infusionsoft account that owns that phone number. If there's not one found, then turboDial can create that contact record for you so that you'll have that contact in your Infusionsoft account. turboDial will use this setting in your global options to decide if it's going to create that contact record when you make that call. It's called Add Missing Contact on Calls and SMS. If that's set to off, in this case it is set to off, when you make an outbound call with your SIP device to a phone number that's not in your Infusionsoft account, there will be no contact record created. If it's set to on, then when you make an outbound call from a SIP device to a phone number that's not in your Infusionsoft account, a new contact record will be created, and it will be given that phone number, and it will have the first name of auto created. Now when that call is answered, a screen pop could be displayed if the option indicates it should be. Let's go back to the credential again. Video Demo. It says an outbound screen pop to the assigned user will be displayed because that box is checked. So that screen pop gets displayed when the call is answered. And at that point, a note record is also created for this call. That note record is going to be assigned to the user that's set up here in your credential, and it'll be attached to the contact if the contact record was found. And the title of the note record is going to be call from SIP : and the name of the credential. And if that call is being recorded, then it will have the hyphen and recorded tag at the end of it. Note that if there are multiple devices registered to this credential, the note record is not going to identify which of those devices made the call. Let's look at some note records. Here's a dashboard panel that shows my SIP outbound calls. If I choose this one, here's a call that came from front desk. It was not recorded. It was assigned to the contact. In other words, when the call was made, it was made to a phone number that was found in Infusionsoft, and the call was set, and the note record was attached to that contact, Marshall Olson. Likewise, the credential was set up to assign note records to a specified user, and that's this user here. Let's make a phone call from that GrandStream desk phone sitting next to me so you can see the call screen pop. Okay, I'm making a call to a cell phone next to me. I'm going to answer that now. You can see the screen pop appeared right there. The phone number that was dialed was looked up in Infusionsoft and discovered to be owned by a person named Marshall Olson. And if I click that up triangle, Marshall Olson will come into view in turboDial. I can look back here and I can refresh this dashboard panel, and now I can see this is the call that was just made. I was using a phone that was registered with the credential called front desk, and it went to Marshall Olson. Okay, let's talk about inbound calls. When you receive a call on a voice over IP SIP device, the inbound and SMS settings associated with that inbound phone number will determine whether the call is going to be recorded, the user that is assigned, and who receives the screen pop alert. And just to remind you again, let's go back and look at that. On this first screen, as we configure this phone number, this says, will this call be recorded or not? Who's going to receive a screen pop? In this case, everyone logged in will receive it. And what user is assigned to that call. The caller ID for that inbound call is used to look up the Infusionsoft contact ID. If that's not found, once again, the contact record can be created by turboDial if the global option indicates it should. When that call is answered, there will be a note record created, and it will have this title, turboDial inbound call to SIP : and then the name of the credential. And if it was recorded, it will have the recorded tag on it. And if there are multiple devices registered to that credential, even though they all rang, the note record will not indicate which device answered the call. Let's show you the screen pop for an inbound call. So I'm just making a call now from that cell phone back to that SIP Grandstream desk phone, and I'm going to answer it. I got a screen pop there. It did successfully find the contact associated with this caller ID, and it displays that in the screen pop. And the label associated for that inbound number to display in the screen pop is called forward to owner. I can show you that here. There's the label for the screen pop, forward to owner. And that's what we saw when the call came in. So now it's pretty simple to create call reports in Infusionsoft to track these calls associated with your SIP credentials. For outbound calls, you'd create a task note report, and the main search value will be turboDial : call from SIP : spelled just as you see it here. If you put that into your main search in the search criteria on tab 1, the search tab of a task note report, you'll get outbound calls placed from your SIP devices. Likewise, for inbound calls, the main search is going to be turboDial : inbound call to SIP, spelled just as you see it there. If you want to zero your report in on to specific credentials, you can add the credential name to the search value that you want to display. In this case, turboDial : call from SIP : front desk will generate a report that displays only calls that were placed by phones registered to the credential called front desk. You can see example reports here in this Infusionsoft dashboard. Here's all the calls that came inbound to SIP credentials. There's a SIP credential called Android, one called front desk, etc., that are shown with inbound calls here. If I do a refresh, we should see the call that just came into video demo, and there it is. And here's the outbound calls. Similar report, gathered into a dashboard panel. turboDial call from front desk, and another one called Test Me One. That's the credential that we deleted a little bit ago. Okay, here are some example SIP devices. Earlier in this presentation, I was using a Grandstream GXP1625 as part of the demonstration. I've also used successfully the Yealink SIP T20. Those are both nice desk phones. There are voice over IP soft phones that you can use on PCs and Macintoshes. One of them, for example, is called Axlite. Another one is called Zoiper. There are probably others out there. And for Android and iOS, Zoiper is also available, and Bria may be useful to you. Note that if you are using your Android or iOS device for SIP calls, you don't need a cellular connection. You can be doing that just with Wi-Fi. Okay, let's talk about inbound simultaneous ringing to multiple destinations. This is kind of a special situation. There's a problem. When you are setting an inbound number to forward to a SIP credential, only one forwarding destination is allowed. We showed you that earlier. Let's bring that back up again. Open this number up. Go to the second screen. You can see that only one destination is allowed. Now, when you configure an inbound number to ring a SIP credential and you set the inbound call action screen to none, that inbound number can now be used as a destination for another inbound number. So recall that we set the inbound action screen to none. So that number can be used as a destination for another inbound number, and that's a way of achieving multiple simultaneous ringing destinations. So if now I choose another number, choose this one and configure it, and I want to set up multiple inbound ringing destinations for it. If I choose that number, that's the number I put that SIP credential on. I can now choose additional inbound destinations. So now I've got this inbound number 5442. When calls come in, it will ring the 3366 number, the 8422 number, and this soft phone. And that 3366 number is a SIP VoIP destination. And on the next screen, if I want to say, for example, add voicemail to this number, that's okay. And this will work just fine. So by using that indirection and not choosing the SIP credential directly, I can have an inbound number ringing to multiple destinations where one of those destinations is a VoIP SIP device. Now I've alluded to another problem that I'm going to describe more here. Voice over IP numbers don't behave well when they are used as one of multiple simultaneous ringing destinations. A voice over IP number won't allow the other destinations to ring. And actually, this is not just a TurboDial or Twilio thing. This is true for any voice over IP number, whether it's Twilio, RingCentral, Vonage, or any other. And remember that all TurboDial and Twilio calls are voice over IP. In TurboDial, we've set up a way to work around that. And if you do configure your inbound number in TurboDial such that the inbound call action screen is set to none, then this number will behave well then if it's chosen as one of multiple simultaneous ringing destinations for an inbound number. So we showed you that earlier. We put this 223366 number as one of multiple simultaneous destinations. And for this number that we're configuring, we in fact do have voicemail on it. And there you can see it there. But if we go to that 22336 number and configure it, you can see it's ringing a SIP credential and its inbound actions are set to none. So configured that way, it will behave well when it's chosen as one of multiple simultaneous ringing destinations. Okay, advanced call handling features. The advanced call handling features are hold and conference, these buttons that you have under the calls tab, park and transfer. Inbound and outbound SIP calls will not be automatically associated to your TurboDial panel. Since you're making those calls, like an outbound SIP call, for example, is being made from a SIP device, and your TurboDial panel is not being used as part of that call. And so you're not able to use these buttons for that call since TurboDial doesn't know what call you're trying to use these buttons for. The call is not part of this TurboDial panel. There is a way to get around that problem. When we configured this SIP credential, voice demo, notice I said outbound screen pop to the assigned user, and I checked that as yes. I also have that set on my other credentials, for example, front desk, that's set to yes. Okay. So now if I make a call from a SIP device, I'm going to use that Grandstream phone next to me and make an outbound call, and now I'm going to answer that call on the cell phone next to me. Now I've got this screen pop. If I click the up arrow here, that signals to TurboDial that I've taken ownership of that call that's being made from that SIP device to that external phone. It also brings the found contact record, in this case Marshall Olson, up. We already had it displayed here, but if we hadn't, it would have brought that contact into view. So this call is now associated to this TurboDial panel. And I can go and I can press the hold button, and that call just now got put on hold. So the customer that I called, or the contact that I called outbound from that SIP device, got placed on hold. And I can use that SIP device now because it's available to make the next call. I can also now take this call off hold. If you recall how advanced call handling features work, when I click this to bring it off hold, it's going to bring it to this device that's currently shown as a calling device. If I want to take it off of hold back to that same SIP device, then I've got to have that SIP device set up here as a calling device. And I got to choose it, and then when I click to bring that call back off of hold, it will ring that SIP device and bring the call to that SIP device again. In this case, if I just say this PC and I click this, it's going to bring the call into this soft phone right here. So by using these assigned buttons in the screen pop that comes from your outbound call, you can associate the TurboDial panel to that call, and that now gives you access to use these 4 advanced call handling buttons: the hold, conference, park, and transfer. This next slide shows you what the assigned buttons are and what they mean. The up triangle simply means view the contact and assign the call to you. The plus button means create a new contact, and that would be handy to do if no contact was found. Third scenario, the up arrow means let's choose a different contact that we have in Infusionsoft and associate the call to that contact. That means the note records and such will all be attached to the contact that we've designated according to these assigned buttons, and any of these buttons will cause the call to be associated to my turboDial panel such that my call handling buttons are now available. Some additional notes. Many voice over IP SIP devices and phones have feature buttons, for example, hold or transfer type buttons on the phone. Those feature buttons are not currently supported by turboDial. Other device buttons on the phone, such as redial or mute, those will work because they are local to the device. They don't require any signaling into the network. The turboDial mobile apps that you may be using, these are not integrated into the SIP voice over IP soft phone clients that you can optionally install on your mobile device. However, you can use those SIP soft phone devices as a calling device. If you've set up an inbound number to ring that credential, then you can use that credential as a calling device by choosing the inbound number that it is associated with. All right, we've gone through how to create and use SIP credentials. Happy calling, everybody.